The engine smells of diesel and fear. My heart is a drum against my ribs, a frantic, wild rhythm that wants to tear its way out of my chest. Every beat pounds the same question into my skull. Am I ready to die today? I grip the wheel tighter. Left hand. Right hand. My palms are slick with sweat. Outside this metal beast, the world is silent. It is the silence of the prey, the silence of the hunted, the silence of a city holding its breath. They don't know I'm here, not yet, but they will. In a few moments, the silence will be shattered. In a few moments, my choice will be made. Not with a vote, not with a quiet prayer, but with 10 tons of steel and a roar of defiance. My name is Wolfgang Engels, and this is the story of how I drove a tank through the Berlin Wall. It is a story about what happens when a man has nothing left to lose except his chains. What would you risk for a single breath of free air? If this kind of story speaks to you, a story about the deep, unshakable human need to be free, then do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more. We bring forgotten voices back to life, and your support makes that possible. To understand why I was willing to drive an armored truck through a wall, you have to understand the cage I lived in. East Berlin in 1963 wasn't just a place, it was a feeling. It was the taste of coal smoke in the air, the constant low-grade fear in your gut, the weight of eyes on the back of your neck. We were citizens of the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, but the name was a lie. We weren't a republic, we were a state run by a single party backed by Soviet tanks. And we weren't democratic. Our thoughts, our words, our very futures were decided for us. The government called itself a paradise for the worker. But our shelves were often empty. We read the news they printed. We watched the television they broadcast, and we learned to keep our true feelings locked away deep inside. The greatest enemy of the state wasn't a foreign army, it was a free thought. And to keep those thoughts from turning into actions, they had the Stasi. The Stasi. The state's security service. They were ghosts. They were everywhere and nowhere. They were your friendly neighbor, your quiet co-worker, maybe even your own cousin. They were an army of spies who listened to whispers, read letters, and turned friends against each other. They created an atmosphere of absolute mistrust. You learned to live with a mask on to guard your words, even with the people you loved. Because one wrong word, one careless joke could lead to a knock on the door in the dead of night. It could lead to a prison sentence for the crime of Republic flight from the Republic. Even thinking about leaving was a crime. Then there was the wall. Before August 1961, Berlin was a city with a wound, but you could still cross it. You could go from the east to the west. Thousands of people did every single day, leaving our gray world for the vibrant, chaotic freedom of West Berlin. But overnight, they closed the wound with barbed wire and concrete. They severed the city's heart. The government told us it was an anti-fascist protection barrier built to keep the corrupt West out. We knew the truth. It wasn't built to keep anyone out. It was built to keep us in. I was just a young man then, 20 years old. I had served in the army. I had even for a time believed in the promise of our socialist state. But my faith had corroded, rusted away by years of lies and limitations. I worked for the People's Police in a standby unit. I was part of the system that held the cage door shut. And every day I saw the wall. It was the first thing I saw on my way to work, and the last thing I saw at night. A gray concrete serpent coiling through the heart of my city. It wasn't just a structure, it was a monster. And it devoured futures, it devoured hope. And it was my job to guard it. A man can live with misery for a long time. You learn to endure, you find small joys, but there always comes a breaking point. A single moment that turns quiet desperation into loud rebellion. For me, it wasn't one thing. It was 1,000 little things. The way the party officials lived in luxury while we stood in line for bread. The stories I heard whispered in secret of friends who had tried to escape. Some made it. Others vanished into the prisons. Some were shot and left to die in the death strip, that barren, sandy hell between the two walls. I heard their stories, and a cold, hard knot of anger began to form in my stomach. This was not protection. This was a prison. My job gave me a unique perspective. I saw the wall every day. I knew its weaknesses. More importantly, I had access to the tools the state used to enforce its power. One of those tools was a BTR-152. In the West, they might call it an armored personnel carrier. We just called it the armored car. It was a Soviet-built machine, a six-wheeled beast of steel designed to carry troops into battle. It was heavy, powerful, and built to withstand punishment. I looked at that machine every day. At first, I saw it as they did a symbol of state power, a weapon to keep us in line. But then one day my perception shifted. I stopped seeing a cage. I started seeing a key. The idea was insane. It was a spark of madness born from utter desperation. Most escape attempts were about stealth. Tunnels dug in secret, daring swims across canals, forged papers and clever disguises. My idea was the opposite. It was not about stealth, it was about noise, it was about brute force. It was about using the very symbol of their oppression against them. What if I could just drive through it? The thought terrified me. It was a suicide mission. The death strip was a gauntlet of watchtowers, armed guards with shoot-to-kill orders and hidden obstacles. But the more I thought about it, the more the fear was replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. This would not just be an escape. It would be a statement. You can build your walls of concrete and steel, you can patrol them with guns and dogs, but you cannot imprison the human spirit. I would not sneak out in the dead of night, I would leave in a clap of thunder. I would kick the door down. So the planning began. It was a plan of beautiful, terrifying simplicity. There were no accomplices. I could trust no one. There was only me, the machine, and the wall. I watched everything. I memorized the patrol schedules. I studied the section of the wall near Potsdamer Platz. It was a wasteland, once the vibrant heart of Berlin, now a scar of sand and concrete. But it was straight, a direct path. I learned the armored car. I made excuses to be near it, to understand its controls. I felt the cold steel under my fingers, and in my mind, I rehearsed the drive 1,000 times. The fear never went away, but my desire for freedom was finally greater than my fear of death. April 17th, 1963. It was a Wednesday. The day felt like any other. Gray, cold, ordinary. But for me, it was the day my life would either end or begin. Reporting for duty was the hardest part, the sheer crushing weight of trying to act normal. I had to make small talk. I had to follow orders. I had to pretend I was the same person I was yesterday. Every smile felt like a lie. Every calm word felt like a betrayal of the storm raging inside me. My chance came under the cover of routine. I found a reason to take control of the BTR-152, a maintenance check, a repositioning. I do not remember the exact excuse. The lie came easily. My mind was already somewhere else. It was across the wall. The moment I climbed into the driver's seat, the world seemed to slow down. The roar of the engine was the sound of my decision becoming real. There was no going back now. My old life was over. In a few minutes, I would either be a free man, a prisoner, or a corpse. I pulled the heavy vehicle out slowly at first. My heart hammered against my ribs. Stay calm. Act normal. Every person I passed, every light I drove under was a potential alarm. I was a ghost in a steel shell hiding in plain sight. Then I turned toward the wall. I pushed the accelerator to the floor. The engine screamed. The 10 tons of steel vibrated around me, a living thing now, a wild animal unleashed. The short distance to the wall disappeared in a heartbeat. That is when they saw me. The first shots sounded like pebbles hitting the hull. Ping, ping, almost harmless. Then the world erupted. A hail of bullets slammed into the armored car. It was a deafening drumbeat of lead against steel. They were aiming for the tires, the viewport for me. A searing white-hot pain tore through my arm. Then another ripped into my leg. The armored plates protected me from most of it, but not all. The pain was immense, but it was distant. Adrenaline was a fire in my veins, burning away everything but the mission. The wall was right there, a monster of gray concrete filling my entire view. It looked indestructible. It looked absolute. So did I. The impact was the loudest sound I have ever heard, a cataclysmic scream of tearing metal and shattering concrete. The world became a violent blur of force and noise. The vehicle bucked like a dying bull, throwing me forward. And then, silence. A ringing in my ears, the smell of dust and hot metal. The engine was dead. I looked up. Through the gaping, jagged hole I had created, I saw it, West Berlin. The lights seemed brighter. The air looked different. I had done it. I was through. But I was still trapped. The vehicle was a wreck wedged in the very wall I had destroyed, and I was bleeding badly. Freedom was 5 feet away, but it might as well have been 1,000 miles. The East German guards were screaming. They were still firing. I was a sitting duck caught in a steel trap. My legs would not work. The pain was no longer distant. It was an all-consuming fire. I had to get out. I had to move. I pulled myself from the wreckage, half falling, half crawling onto the hood of the broken machine. The cold night air hit my face. On one side of me was the GDR, death. On the other, the West, life. I was tangled in the barbed wire that lined the top of the wall. It tore at my clothes, at my skin. Every movement was agony. Then I heard new sounds, not the shouts of my captors, but shouts of encouragement. People had seen it. West Berliners. They were running towards me. They were yelling, "Come on, you can do it!" Their faces were not filled with suspicion or fear. They were filled with hope, with welcome. That is what gave me the final ounce of strength. I threw myself from the wire, falling onto the hard pavement of the West. The impact sent a wave of agony through my body. I lay there broken and bleeding, looking up at the night sky. Hands grabbed me. Strong, gentle hands. They pulled me away from the wall, away from the guns, into the safety of the crowd. The faces of strangers looked down at me, their voices a comforting murmur. I was free. I do not remember much after that, the wail of a siren growing closer. The inside of an ambulance. The sterile white ceiling of a hospital room. I remember drifting in and out of consciousness, the pain being replaced by the gentle tide of medicine. I had been shot multiple times. My leg was broken, but I was alive. And I was free. You know, I have had decades to think about that night. About the sound of the crash, the feeling of the bullets, the faces in the crowd. And it is funny what you remember. The clearest memory I have is the feeling of those hands, the hands of total strangers, pulling me to safety. In the East, you are taught to trust no one. Your life was a solitary struggle. But in my first moments of freedom, I was saved by the simple, powerful kindness of others. If you have made it this far into the journey, thank you. This story is more than just history. It is a testament to what we can endure and overcome. If you are enjoying this kind of storytelling, I would be honored if you subscribed. It helps bring forgotten voices like mine back to life. Now let me tell you what that single act of defiance meant, not just for me, but for the world that was watching. My escape was just one of over 5,000 successful attempts to cross the Berlin Wall. But it was different. Most escapes were quiet, desperate acts of stealth. People swam through freezing canals. They dug tunnels like Tunnel 29, risking collapse and discovery. They hid in secret compartments in cars. They flew homemade hot air balloons. Each one was a miracle of courage and ingenuity. But my escape was loud. It was an assault. It was an undeniable physical violation of the symbol of the Cold War. In the West, my story became a sensation. It was the perfect propaganda story. A young East German soldier using the state's own weapon crashes through the wall of shame to freedom. It was proof of the desperation and the bankruptcy of the communist system. I was interviewed, my story told and retold, a symbol of the unquenchable human spirit. In the East, it was a different story. The Stasi, of course, launched a massive investigation. They needed to make sure it could never happen again. For them, I was not a hero. I was a traitor who had committed a grave crime. My story was suppressed, my name erased. They reinforced the wall where I had broken through, making it stronger, deadlier. The cage got stronger. But you cannot erase an echo. The wall stood for another 26 years after my escape. More than 100 other people would die trying to cross it. It was a scar that defined a generation. But every crack, every escape, every act of defiance weakened it. Not its concrete, but its power. The power of the wall was based on fear, on the idea that it was absolute and eternal. My escape and the thousands of others like it proved that it was not. It showed that no wall is strong enough to contain the human desire for self-determination. I went on to build a new life in West Germany. I got married. I worked. I lived a simple, quiet, free life. The very kind of life that was impossible on the other side of that wall. And then, in 1989, the impossible happened. The wall fell. Not to an army or a tank, but to the force of 1 million ordinary people who had finally had enough of the cage. Seeing those images, people standing on the wall, cheering, crying, taking it apart piece by piece, that was a feeling I cannot describe. My small, violent act of defiance had been answered by a peaceful roar of millions. Looking back, was it worth it? The risk, the pain, the scars I still carry. The answer is simple: yes. Freedom is not an abstract idea. It is the air you breathe. It is the right to choose your own path, to speak your own mind, to love who you love. It is the right to be the author of your own life. I was just one man in one moment of history. But my story and the stories of all who fought for their freedom reminds us of a timeless truth. Oppression can build walls, but courage can break them down. Tyranny can command armies, but it can never conquer the human heart. The Berlin Wall is gone now, a ghost of history. But new walls are built every day all over the world. Some are made of concrete and wire. Others are made of fear, intolerance, and lies. My question to you is the same one I asked myself on that cold night in 1963 as I sat in a steel beast, staring down a monster of concrete. What will you do to defend your freedom? And what walls in your own world need to be torn down? If this journey moved you, I would love for you to like, share, and comment with your thoughts. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people. And do not forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you are here for the next one as we continue to explore the moments when ordinary people did extraordinary things. Thank you for listening.